quite unexpected details from insiders in the White House, against the backdrop of Trump's statement about preparing a meeting with Putin in Hungary, and amid the Kremlin's enthusiastic exclamations that Putin has once again outplayed Trump and disrupted the United States president's meeting with Zelensky. Insiders in the White House say that the Russians are celebrating too early, and to understand this, it's worth looking at the situation more broadly. As stated in the White House, the diplomatic victories of United States President Donald Trump have changed the geopolitical landscape and cornered the Russian dictator Vladimir Putin, leaving him no room to maneuver. Insiders note that Trump is encouraged by his success in achieving a ceasefire between Israel and the Gaza Strip, and is confident in his ability to achieve a breakthrough in Russia's war against Ukraine. Moreover, the White House hinted that during the summit in Alaska in August, Putin himself personally pushed Trump to support Ukraine, with his delusional stories about the Ruriks, the Pechenigs, and so on. Also today, the White House officially acknowledged that the United States has increased intelligence sharing with Ukraine, including information about targets located deeper inside Russian territory. This decision is part of a strategic shift that will allow negotiations with Moscow to resume, which had stalled after the summit in Alaska. And they added that all of Trump's recent high-profile statements were aimed at forcing Putin to make the first call, and Putin did just that. My name is Alexei Peci. Today is October 17th. Let's discuss this topic together. But before we start, I want to ask you to subscribe to this channel, like this video, leave any comment under this episode, and subscribe to my Telegram channel, Peci News. The link is in this video's description. And if you want to support the work of this YouTube channel, you can do so with any donation using the links and details in the description of this video. It says there, support Alexei Peci's channel. Choose any format that's convenient for you. I will be grateful for any support you can give. So, I'll start this episode with a headline from the Telegraph, because today the Telegraph sums things up quite well. The diplomatic victories of United States President Donald Trump have changed the geopolitical landscape and cornered the Russian leader Vladimir Putin, leaving him no room to maneuver. And here's what comes next. Insiders note that Trump is encouraged by his success in achieving a ceasefire between Israel and Gaza, and is confident that he can achieve a similar breakthrough in Russia's war against Ukraine. And so insiders note that the agreements reached in the Middle East and near Russia have strengthened Washington's influence at the expense of Putin's influence. Where Moscow once had influence, Washington does now. And Moscow was just kicked out of there like with wet rags. So the peace agreement between Armenia and Azerbaijan, which was finalized with the signing of the peace agreement at the White House in August, reduces dependence on routes passing through or controlled by Russia. And this puts an end to the conflict that allowed Moscow to play both sides at different times, supplying weapons to one side and deploying peacekeepers to the other. That is, the conflict around Nagorno-Karabakh was an issue that Russia always manipulated. Now, Russia no longer has any influence there. Moreover, notice how at the last meeting, Putin apologized to Azerbaijani President Aliyev for the downed Azerbaijani plane. And you should also pay attention to the posture Putin had while doing it. Overall, the Kremlin's position as a hegemon in Central Asia is weakening, and the Kremlin is also witnessing the weakening of its allies in the Middle East, especially as Trump's position is strengthening again. This primarily concerns Iran, whose position has been shaken after Hamas and Hezbollah suffered serious losses in their conflicts with Israel. And the collapse of the Syrian government has effectively destroyed Tehran's so-called axis of resistance, meaning this chain of proxy forces and terrorist groups. Even Russia's attempts to find friends in the Middle East have turned into a shameful disaster. What do you mean? And on Wednesday this week, a summit called Russia-Arab World was supposed to take place in Moscow, where leaders would have flown to Moscow to demonstrate that the Kremlin is far from isolated. Putin was hoping that the leaders of Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, Qatar, Oman, and so on, all of them would gather in Moscow and show the Arab world together with Vladimir Putin. The Russians would boast, "See, the Arab world supports us." The summit was cancelled, though the Russians claim it was just postponed. Because no one, I repeat, no one except President of Syria Assad wanted to go there. Arab leaders all refused the Moscow summit with the Russians, saying, "No, thank you, are you kidding? No." Therefore, the combined effect of the agreements and arrangements signed during the first 9 months of Trump's presidency led to a decrease in tensions and unrest in the Middle East, which the Kremlin has been exploiting for decades. Now, to sum up, Putin has significantly lost influence in the Middle East and Central Asia. That's why Putin is desperately trying to hold on to Ukraine, and Putin was really hoping that Trump would help him keep control over Ukraine. And let's be honest, during the first months of Trump's presidency, that's exactly what he tried to do. But then Vladimir Putin himself ruined everything. Today, sources in the White House reported that the meeting between United States President Donald Trump and the Russian dictator Vladimir Putin in Alaska promised to be a big step in regulating Russia's war against Ukraine. Instead, the head of the Kremlin categorically rejected all proposals and gave Trump a long historical lecture. And so, according to sources behind closed doors, Trump's broad smile was replaced by disappointment and even anger. Moreover, Putin, in the presence of only a few advisors, rejected the United States president's proposal to lift sanctions in exchange for a ceasefire. At that time, he insisted that he would stop the aggression against Ukraine only if Ukraine surrendered and gave up its territories. And then, according to sources after that, Putin delivered some incoherent speech about pseudo-history, in which he started mentioning medieval princes such as Rurik of Novgorod and Yaroslav the Wise. He also didn't forget about Bohdan Khmelnytsky, promoting the idea that Ukraine and Russia are supposedly one nation, one people, and so on. Well, in short, all this nonsense from the Russians started pouring into Donald Trump's ears. And sources add that Trump was stunned by Putin's speech and even raised his voice several times, and at one point even threatened to just leave. He said, "What are you talking about? What Ruriks? What are you even saying?" So, these sources noted that in the end, the United States president cut the meeting short, canceled the planned lunch where the American and Russian delegations were supposed to discuss economic ties and cooperation between the countries. The sources emphasized that it was the summit in Alaska that became the lowest point in the relationship between Trump and Putin. And so the sources state that it was the outcome of this meeting that caused a shift in the United States' position in favor of Ukraine. In addition, the sources state that it was after the summit in Alaska that the United States intensified intelligence sharing with Ukraine, including information about targets located deeper within Russian territory. This decision is part of a strategic shift that will allow the resumption of stalled negotiations with Moscow. Well, that's what they were counting on in the White House. And now, according to a source cited by cable news network with the permission of the United States, Ukraine is now using a targeted strategy of strikes against Russian energy infrastructure. According to the source, given the effective freezing of the front line and more than 1 million deaths as a result of the war, Ukraine believes that attacks on Russian energy infrastructure are one of the few ways to achieve their goals. Nevertheless, as United States Vice President J.D. Vance stated today, neither Ukraine nor Russia is ready to reach a peace agreement at this time, since there are too many irreconcilable differences between the countries. Next is a quote from J.D. Vance. No matter how much energetic diplomacy by the President of the United States pushes people toward a solution, ultimately both sides must be ready to make a deal. And right now, despite all our efforts, and we will continue them, the Russians and Ukrainians just haven't reached the point where they can make an agreement. But a settlement is still possible, but it will require much more work. I think there is a fundamental mismatch of expectations. Russians tend to think that on the battlefield they are doing much better than they actually are. This has made it difficult to reach an agreement in the past few months, despite some progress. After this quote from J.D. Vance, I immediately remembered yesterday's statement by Putin's aide Ushakov, who, following the conversation between Putin and Trump, said that Putin explained to the American president that they have a strategic advantage across the whole front. Does that mean Ukraine could collapse in hours? It's just that they simply haven't started fighting at full strength yet. Well, still, you remember those tales about how they haven't even started yet, right? Putin once again, according to Ryzhikov, was explaining to Trump that the advantage is supposedly on the Russian side. Or it's just that the Russian side supposedly doesn't really want to fight, but if they wanted to, they'd be at the Polish border by tomorrow. And J.D. Vance says directly, listen, they're a bit detached. with their overestimated assessments, they think they're actually making some kind of progress there at an incredible pace. And he says that's exactly what makes it difficult to make a deal. But unfortunately, there's no guarantee that Trump won't change his mind. And here I'll give you a quote from one of the European diplomats. With Trump, it's a constant game of tug of war. You talk to him, you help him understand that Putin is a problem, and then you move on to other issues and he shifts back toward Putin's position again. That's why you have to talk to him again. And it goes on like this over and over, again and again. I'll leave it at that. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments under this episode. Subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and don't forget to like. That's all for now. Take care. Goodbye.